He's all set. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Marilyn, and I'm a grateful member of Al-Anon. And what a joy to be here tonight. The first time I spoke for Al-Anon was at the International Convention in Seattle in 1990. And they passed out these beautiful books and had the slogans, which sometimes the groups I've been at, we've used it for a book study. And I needed the slogans. And so Al-Anon has given me all kinds of tools that I would have never gotten anyplace else. Probably the next place I spoke was at the all-men's meeting that you have for the gratitude dinner, and that was an exciting night because he brought his girlfriend. And I was really scared because I didn't want to tell my story in front of that situation. So thanks for reminding me. It's kind of like my life's going full circle right now. A lot of things are coming back from being in this program for 30 years. And actually, it was the greatest birthday gift I could have ever gotten, because we had our bottom. And I filed for divorce with restraining orders because he tried to kill me that night. And moved in with my minister's family for a while, and when he finally got out of the house and I could move home, he called me up on the phone one night. And I says, "You're not supposed to be talking to me because we have restraining orders." And he says, "Well, don't talk, just listen." So what he said was, "I've been going to AA meetings, and good wives of alcoholics go to Al-Anon." That's what they tell me at AA. Well, I'm such a good Al-Anon and very obedient person in those days. Guess where I went that night? And it was my belly button birthday, July 15th, 1985, and that was my first Al-Anon meeting. And I remember it because it was my birthday. And I am so grateful that he broke the restraining order and told me that, because I needed Al-Anon big time. I know from the step work I've done, I had 6 codependencies to break, not just one. And I've learned a lot about myself in this program. I didn't have a clue when I got to this program. I was literally born into a dysfunctional alcoholic family, then my mother was mentally ill. And that's what I knew. And it was called domestic violence. And by the time, they fought every night. And by the time I was 3 years old, I actually saw my dad beat up my mom. And I was traumatized. And I went into an emotional little shell, like a turtle shell, to protect myself. And if they're off fighting, I didn't know in those days the words abandoned. I've learned a lot in this program. I was abandoned. I felt that way. They weren't there for me. And I said, "Well, God, I'll need some money to live on. I don't know how I'm going to eat if they can't take care of me." And, I've got a really great God in my life. And that's worked. That part has worked. That's one of the few things in my life that worked out well. I've always had food to eat and a roof over my head. Mostly. So I was a very shy, retired child, afraid of everything. And then my mother remarried, and it was worse than what I had experienced. And I know today I better understand what went on. My dad was an alcoholic who later on did get into recovery. But I know my mother, being mentally ill, never did come out of her situation, and she married someone as sick or sicker than she was. And I literally became a Cinderella. I know the story very well. I literally took out the ashes. We had a wood-burning fireplace. But I also did all the chores. And you were supposed to do the chores Saturday morning, and by noon you could go play. But there was always another chore. But there's another chore. You can't go play yet. There's another chore. I'm still learning how to have fun, people. All I did was work. And it was my responsibility to make sure it was all done. And if it wasn't done the day before, you got it too. So when I went through college, I always had studied for the final ahead of time. Everybody else is burning the midnight oil, and I've done my studying for the finals. I'm all ready. I go to bed and sleep through it, and you get up in the morning, and I'm ready to go. So it was a pretty, I won't go into all the ugly details, but one morning I did not get up to do the chores, and he came in with a pitcher of ice water and ice cubes, pulled back the covers, and dumped it on me. And I was in this cold, wet water, and did get up and do the chores. And it was the only morning in my life at that point that I had thought, I am so tired, I'm going to sleep in this morning. And that I always got up after that one. I didn't want more ice water. So it was not a very fun growing up experience for me, and the domestic violence continued. And I understand today that my mother married a sex addict, rageaholic, and I believe, I can't say he was an alcoholic, but I believe he was a closet drinker. So the only way I could get out of that mess, I was really trying to get acknowledged by my parents to be a living, breathing human being. So I'd get one more A in school. You know, they'll say something, you got another A. No, it never happened. I ended up being valedictorian with a 3.98, and they never recognized or gave me a gift or anything. So I went off to college. Well, if you graduate from college with honors, maybe they'll notice, you know, I'm a pretty good person. And 30 years after I graduated from college, my stepdad said, "We never gave you a college graduation gift, did we?" I said, "No, and I never got one either." So, I mean, that was the story of my life. However, when I got to college, I met somebody that I could actually relate with. Ha-ha, guess what? Somebody that was just as familiar as what my family I was raised in. I didn't know that at the time, that like attracts like, but we could seem to be able to talk. And one night, he got really plowed, and he had moved off campus. I'd moved on to campus at that, but that was funny because I was living in this girls' boarding house, and he moved into the apartment house across the street from me, and that was when I decided I wanted to move up and be in a dorm. So I moved the other direction. And I was sitting on the floor with him under the table. Now, why we were sitting on the floor today, I'll never know. But he's smashed, and he's telling me some of his childhood abuse. And my heart leaped out to him, and I could feel the depth of his pain, which matched the depth of my abuse. And I'm going to fix him. And I was hooked. I wanted out of the engagement because I couldn't handle his rage any longer. And so I was going to opt out. And that was the week I discovered I was expecting. And in those days, an unwed mother was the scum of the earth. And the options were different in those days. This is the middle 50s. And so you had to go out of the country for an abortion in those days. And that was out of the question. I couldn't adopt her out. There was no way. And I didn't want to be, I didn't have any skills or anything to be a mother or to raise her, so I decided if I got married, I'd go down the aisle and I'd get a divorce and I'd be a divorced mother with a child. That was one step up the ladder from the social, you know, what people thought of you in those days. That was my plan. It only took 30 years to leave that marriage. Things went from working out while we were still seniors in college. It went pretty well. And then when he got his first job, I'm a retired teacher. I loved your joke. He got his first job, and 6 months into the marriage, he strangled and raped me. And from then on, I was strictly, you do whatever, say what you want, and how high do you want me to jump? And that's how the rest of the marriage went. When the kids were little, he seemed to tone down somewhat, and then things seemed to start getting worse after our son was born. His rage started coming out a lot. And things just went from bad to worse, no matter what we tried and did and whatever. So as he was saying that he was getting a divorce when we were getting a divorce, and Dick called me up one time, and he says, I've called 12 people to go to the Joe and Charlie workshop. You probably remember when they came to town in 89, 87 it was, the first one. And nobody will go with me. Do you want to go with me? Well, I wanted to go, but there were no tickets. And I was like, thank you, God, you answered my prayer. So I got to go to the Joe and Charlie program. They were there from out of town, and they'd been all over the world as big book scholars. And their tapes are still pretty popular in some situations. And so I got to be there, and it was wonderful. And every recess or when we had coffee breaks, he and I would go out to the car to see if we couldn't work it out. God has a wonderful sense of humor. And I'd be sitting in there in the car, and he'd want to turn on the radio because we were both musicians. And so he'd want to play some music. And every time we sat in the car trying to work this out, the song that would come on was 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. So after about the third time, I says, okay, God, I got the message. Things just didn't seem to get any better. And we took a trip up to Canada, and coming home, he got really irate. He didn't go drink for 3 weeks and then decided to celebrate how well things went. And within minutes, it went down the tubes like you wouldn't believe. I mean, it was just like that. And it was a suicide ride. I was scared spitless, and he tried to kill me several times, and I tried suicide to get out of the mess. And so I had gone to church all my life and wondered, what's wrong with this? I sit in church, and I'm going to church, and I teach in Sunday school and sing in the choir, and I'm getting beat up on Sunday afternoons, so what's going on, God? But I always used the hymnal for the prayers because that's what we were taught. And for the first time in my life, I said a prayer from my heart. I know today. I didn't know it then. I said, God, please help me. I really don't want to die. And within minutes, he was off the road. We almost had 2 head-on collisions, which is just part of the story of that ride. Scared the dickens out of me. And so he pulled over and passed out over the wheel, and we came back home. Only that I was so scared the whole time. I was like a pincushion. I was so nervous and full of anxiety, and he wouldn't let me out at the border because I didn't want to be in the car, and we stopped for coffee. I was so scared. It was when I went into the restroom, it was like there was another Marilyns standing next to me, and I pulled a paper out of my purse, and it was like this other person wrote a note for help. And I left it at the coffee shop by the cash register, and within minutes there were 5 policemen stopped us and pulled us off the road. And they helped me leave the situation. Well, he took the money out of my purse that he'd given me the night before for groceries, and that's why I was safe and thought I was safe enough to leave, is because the money, I taught school, but it was always his money. And I finally had some money. Went for breakfast, went to pay the bill, and the money's missing, And the policeman offered to pay the bill, but I had a couple dollars that covered the breakfast, and so I could get by with it, and bought a magazine called Our Son, and he came and got me at Sumas. I am so grateful for the steps, because the steps have taught me what really went on in my life. And I didn't have a clue. I really didn't have a clue, and I didn't know how to do it differently. That's why I tried suicide. I said, in fact, that night, that I'm standing here today is an absolute miracle, because there's about 12 times I should have died. I've been off cliffs, and angels have put me back on the road. I mean, all kinds of amazing things have happened in my life. Literally, I went to a meeting one night, and he was going to beat me up after the meeting that night, and the angel stopped him again. I found out how to stop domestic violence. I write about that and help people all the time. So what I know today is that in step 1, when we talk about I'm powerless over alcoholism and that my life is unmanageable, I never heard the word alcoholism in my family. I never heard the word alcoholism anywhere. That was a totally unfamiliar thing for me. So, and when he told me to go to Al-Anon, I had not a clue what you people were about, but I was told to go, and in those days I was very obedient because I didn't want to get hurt one more time. I mean, that was my childhood. If you don't do what you're told, there's a price. So I was going to go to the meeting. That was the first time I was around people that laughed and had fun, and I'm sitting there. They're having a good time. How do they do that? Yeah. And they said to come back. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I found a sponsor early in the program. I have had the world's greatest sponsors, believe me, because they have helped me get through. I couldn't even believe. So I had a sponsor, and she said, Marilyn, you're sicker than the rest of us. You have to go to family treatment. What do you mean I'm sicker than the rest of you? Well, it turns out I really was. She was right. He wouldn't go to treatment. He never did. And I talked Puget Sound Hospital into letting me come into the family program anyway. And one of the first things I found out in there, it's a disease of no talk, no trust, and no feelings. And immediately I knew what was wrong with me. I had never talked to a soul. I didn't have friends. Who do you talk to? How do you trust parents that are fighting all the time? So how do you trust people you see? How do you trust something invisible called love, I had no understanding in those days what God was about. And I didn't have a feeling in the world. I was a really good ice cube. I tried to talk once to my mother about the incest, and she says, don't feel that way, so I knew she was never there for me. My mother was paranoid schizophrenic. So I knew my life was unmanageable, but I had no clue how alcohol could have anything to do with it. I mean, my life was terrible, horrible, and awful, and what are you talking about? It's alcohol. I had no way of putting the dots together for several years. A little thick, I guess. No, I know today why, but it was just not time for me to put the dots together yet. When I got to the second step, I didn't know what insanity was. I knew that God could be my higher power because I went to church, but I knew God wasn't good enough for me. I wasn't good enough for God is what in Sunday school, the kids would talk about all the neat things happening in their life, and I knew I wasn't good enough. It wasn't going to happen to me. Neat for them, but it wasn't going to happen to me. Good things didn't happen to me. And so this program has taught me to search for answers and search for the truth. And I read a book called People of the Lie by Scott Peck, who wrote The Road Less Traveled, and in that book explained what was going on, and immediately I understood my mother. And he says that how you judge insanity is by the degree to which you lie to yourself. So if you're in an insane asylum, the degree of the lying that you do to yourself is the measure of how they classify you as insane. I vowed on the spot when I read that I would be as honest with myself as I possibly could because I did not want to be mentally ill like my mother. One of the best vows I ever made. Sometimes people think I'm a little too honest, but, it pays off. Doing the right thing's never wrong. By the time I got to step 3, I'd been in hell. I knew what that was about. I figured that step 3 was the greatest gift you could give me. That was my way out of hell. Turn my life over to a God that would take care of me. Wow, nobody ever cared about me. I was always low man on the totem pole. And they didn't have other reading books when I got here. ODAT was the only one. And I was off on a weekend with my husband still. I was in the program. And he was having his tizzies, and I was in the motel room while he was off at a golf tournament, and I was going crazy. And I started reading the back of this book, the different things that are listed, and I started reading every page I could possibly was listed. I'd go right to the next one. And I read this book and read this book and read this book. And I found a page that changed my life. It is often emphasized in Al-Anon writings and talks at meetings that ours is not, a little nervous, and talk at meetings that ours is not a religious program, but a spiritual one. The central truth of all worship, creed, church, or dogma is that God is the essence of our being, and this is the spiritual idea of Al-Anon. If we stop going to church, we may think we are disposing of a God who has disappointed us. We may see him as a punisher who has sought us out with unmerited pain and suffering. However we regard him, or even if we do not recognize him at all, he is always there within us, within everything and every person in the universe, constantly available for our help if we are willing to accept. How well we use the consciousness of God in our daily lives depends not on him, but on us. I have observed that those who make the best progress in the Al-Anon program are those who readily accept the help of a higher power. And once they can do that, it is easier for them to let go and let God, and their problems resolve themselves in a way that passes human understanding. And the quote is, "Lord, thou hast been our dwelling place in all generations." And for the first time, I found a God in my heart. It wasn't a God out there with a white robe. So for me, that was a huge, huge shift from my religious upbringing. And I know today it's not my job to look for God, but it's my job to look for the obstacles that separated me from that conscious contact with God. So I started doing 4 steps. I have been chairing that 4-step workshop as part of that group that went to Joe and Charlie tapes for 23 years, and I have learned so much about spirituality by doing that. It's kind of like you learn what you teach. And I have come into some big understandings of how and what this program's really about, the deeper parts of it. And so I'm grateful that I have been able to help a lot of people with the 4-step workshop, because I have found out I do not have to recreate the past. All that stuff that happened to me was because they were sick people. If they didn't grow up, they couldn't teach me what I needed to so I could grow up. So my life was based as a 3-year-old all my life. I went to college as a 3-year-old, can you imagine? Graduated with honors. Soloed with the symphony, Bellingham Symphony. I've done all kinds of things. I was emotionally 3 years old. I taught school. I've taught junior college. I teach all kinds of classes and things now. I was 3 years old, and I did all this stuff, you know. Can you imagine? I can't even imagine how I pulled it off. I know God did it. It wasn't me. But the point is, I have to emotionally release all that 3-year-old vision of what happened to me. And in step 5, I get to see the reality and the truth of where it was and how it really came down, not how a 3-year-old saw it. And I can move out of being a 3-year-old and recreating that story over and over, trying to find different answers. Step 2, insanity, do the same thing over and over, expecting different results. I don't have to do that today. I was so glad when step 6 came along that you could get rid of all of that 3-year-old vision and all the problems and abuse that I went through. I could give it all to God, so I didn't have to have that separating me from God anymore. Fear stops God's love in our lives. And I didn't have to have that stopped anymore. And by the time I got to step 7, I was told in a meditation that whenever you release something, to immediately replace it with some God's love and grace, because nature abhors a void. You don't want just anything to pop in. So why not replace it with the best? And so what a relief. You know, I can tell you, I'll never forget the first time I was meditating down in Death Valley, and for the first time in my life, I felt grace. It was an amazing experience. And that's just as grown and grown since I've stayed longer in the program. I'm pretty much in grace most of the time nowadays. It was very fascinating to me to understand that God was always there, and I could release those things, and I could grow up. And step 7 says, now I'm ready to become a mature person and let those childish things leave. So all those feelings, all those experiences where I don't have to look at them in the same way today. And step 8 and 9 says I get to take care of my behavior and be responsible for it. And yes, I've made amends. The biggest amends was to myself. And my amends is I will not put myself in a place to be victimized again, and I will not participate and volunteer to be a victim again. And I haven't. In fact, I actually got into a church situation, changing churches, and I walked out the door. I said, do I have a choice? And they said, no, and I walked out the door and never went back. So I have choices today. I don't have to be a victim. You've taught me how to think for myself and to move out of places that are going to be hurtful and harmful, and I don't stay there. And then I'm doing my 9th step, see? So this program has taught me how to respond in loving ways, and by the time I got to step 10, I could actually start moving into living in the now. And I check it, pretty much daily. In fact, it's usually the spur of the moment. All of a sudden, something's wrong, and I'll say, okay, what's going on here? And I kind of try to work it out, what's necessary to take care of. And it's nice to have tools today where you can reflect back and see what my side of the story is, because it's always me. And my sponsor taught me if there's a finger pointing, there's 3 fingers pointing back. And what I've discovered, it doesn't matter what the situation is, it's always me. It's what am I sending out? What do you got to change and send it out? Send out love. And so I stay pretty much in the now. The past is not a problem. I outgrew all my fear. I faced my last fear last fall. Boy, my life changed. You wouldn't believe. I went up in that silly wheel at the waterfront in Seattle. And there was no way I was going to go up in that wheel. Because I'd had a panic attack and scared spitless and an octopus ride in the 6th grade, and there was no way I was going to go. My boyfriend was turning 80 at the time. And he wanted to go up, and I says, no way. Well, I talked with my sponsor, and she said, I can hypnotize you, and you can do that. Well, hey, I do that for a living. Don't laugh. So I said, well, if that's what she'd do, I says, I'll just go into meditation and take care of it. So what I did, I went into meditation, and I figured out it came from the 6th grade situation. And I says, now from teaching or sharing the 4th step, I know that fear is the lack of faith. So I put myself in the arms of God and went up in the Ferris wheel and I had a blast. There was nobody sitting there telling me, Marilyn, now hush up and don't enjoy this and don't get too excited and don't, that's how it was at home. You weren't supposed to have a good time. Nobody was there pushing me down, not letting me just enjoy it. And we didn't get there when we planned to. And it was later in the day than I expected. And I thought, I'm going to get crummy pictures, And as we got up into the Ferris wheel to the top, the orange came out and the sunset was absolutely gorgeous. God gave me this beautiful gift. I got wonderful pictures. In fact, it's going to be the picture on my next book. So when I became fearless, I found out that it's possible. I was a teacher, and on the front page of the Weekly Reader, one time we were studying it, and there was a chart. I wish I'd saved it. There was a chart of the years you outgrow your fears. And I don't remember what it said, how old you are when you outgrow all your fears, but at this point in time, I'm pretty much fearless. I still get a little anxiety a little bit, but I'm not really afraid, because God, if you put it in God's hands, what's there to be afraid of, If you say your prayers, you don't need to have fear. So by the time I got to step 11, that's a conscious contact with God, and as you remove the things that are identified in step 4 and release those and start being responsible for your life and everything, you can have a conscious contact with God because you've removed the stuff that stopped it. And so I have terrific meditations, and I've gone into other spiritual areas of my life. And I like to equate it to a toaster on the drain board, and the toaster can sit on your drain board, and you can put the bread in the toaster, and it can sit there forever, right? But if you plug it into the wall and get the electricity to connect to your toaster, you can push it down, and it'll actually make toast. Isn't that amazing? So connecting to God is like, to me, plugging into the electricity, and you get results. It pops up. And a conscious contact to me with God means I don't have to be a fear-based person anymore. I can now be a love-based person. And I can, not perfectly, people, I've had my ups and downs, but I can respond better with love today instead of the disease, as we call it, but the fear behaviors that I learned in survival as a child. I don't have to continue to act that way anymore. I can grow up. And to continue to pass that message of love, I believe our program is a program of love. And to pass that on to others today is a real joy. And when I was in the motel room that day reading this practically page for page, afterwards I wrote a poem which is directly related to what's in our ODAT. And it's called A New Me. And this became kind of my guide for growing up in the program. Total acceptance of myself means the opportunity for reality. Unconditional love grants my own gentleness, caring. Courtesy lifts my dignity, sees value. Tolerance understands favorably my mistakes, errors. Self-esteem believes in confidence, guides my life. Sharing my experiences, feelings, creates life's happiness. Many interests bring a fulfilling life, helping others through their strife. Spirituality generates peace of mind. Worth knows the purpose for my birth. And you know, what I'd like to say is today my life is so different. It's the exact opposite of where I was. I don't live in hell anymore. I really does feel like heaven on earth. And this program has taught me that the things I went through in the disease I get to do with the program and follow through in a healthy way today. And Janet's moving home in 2 weeks. My daughter that I got married to have. She's leaving her husband of 27 years. He won't quit drinking. And she can't take it anymore. She's been in Al-Anon 18 years. And she finally said, enough's enough. And she's been calling me every day in tears, mostly. And the other day, she says, well, Mom, she says, she wasn't crying. She says, it's better today. She says, I just called to hear a couple words of your wisdom. Now, when we used to talk on the phone, she's in Boise. When we used to talk on the phone, I would put the phone way out here because of her anger was so intense. But the program told me you don't disconnect from people. You detach, but you don't disconnect. So here, you know, she's angry lady on the phone, and okay, dear, you know, and today, and she got it out of her system, obviously, and we have a relationship today I always wanted, and it's amazing. So this program is giving me a second chance to be the mother I couldn't be 55 years ago. So thank you for me to be able to learn. It's safe to open my heart. It's safe to be vulnerable. And actually, that's the safest place I could be. Because when he tried to attack me that one night, I was told in a meditative state to send love to him. God forgive him, for he knows not what he does. God bless him. And I said it twice, and he never touched me again. When you send love to somebody, it's the safest thing you can do. Nobody can attack love. It's when you're attacking them, they attack back. You stop the game. You stop the game. And this program has taught me to detach, and I've had lots of learning to detachment. To send love to those people. They're hurting, they're sick. They need help, they need compassion. I know my ex-husband, the abuse he went through. And I just have compassion for him today, that he's still in that in many ways. New stories, but, you know, anyways. And so everybody out here, we're all part of God's one spirit of love. We're all loving people just to come together and love each other. You know, it's love your neighbor as yourself, because it's the same spirit. It's just a reflection of you. And you're loving yourself when you send it out. That's what comes back. And I love this program because of love is coming back into my life. Not back. I never had it when I got here, but love is coming in today in ways that are just beautiful for me. And thank you for helping me to learn to grow up. Oh, thank you. Oh, well, I hope so. Oh, yeah. Okay. I have to get unhooked.
Unhook you.
Yeah.
Here comes the
Here comes the unhooker. There you go. I don't want to.
Don't think about the opposite. You better leave that one alone.